Another pro-life objection to Judith Jarvis Thomson's unconscious violinist thought experiment is called the responsibility objection. If you haven't heard of this analogy, you can watch my video explaining it. And the objection goes like this. People are responsible for the dependence that they create. In the analogy, you are not the person responsible for the violinist needing you to survive, because he became ill on his own. Pregnancy, however, is generally the product of consensual sex. So because the mother of the fetus has created a person who needs her to survive, she is responsible for keeping the fetus alive. Now, this objection doesn't prohibit abortion in the cases of rape, because the mother was not responsible for creating the person. But in all other cases of abortion, this argument holds. In response to this objection, I'd just like to say that I do think people are responsible for the dependence that they create. For example, I think that if you get into a car accident and it's your fault, and the person you hit is injured, you should be legally responsible for paying any healthcare costs they acquire. I also think that men should pay child support for their children. I think parents in general are responsible for their children. However, I also think we have the right to decide what happens to our own bodies. So although we are responsible for the dependence that we create, we also have the right to refuse to allow them to use our bodies. To illustrate this point, I created a thought experiment. Imagine you and your wife are going on a romantic road trip to a cabin in the mountains. You know the risks inherent in driving, but you're a good driver and you follow the rules of the road. You are in a residential area and a kid doesn't see you. He runs out from behind a parked car and you hit him. He is rushed to the hospital. He's okay except for his kidneys. They are severely damaged and he needs a transplant or he will die. Although you took precautions in order to avoid a situation like this, you have still caused someone to need you to survive, so the government forces you to give up a kidney. You have to undergo surgery. You have to take a few months off work, so you are now in a terrible financial situation. Your wife leaves you, and everyone around you looks down on you because you ran over a kid. Does the government have the right to force people to sacrifice their bodies and their lives in this way? I don't think so. If we did force people to sacrifice their bodies for the dependence that they create, not only would people who get into car accidents be required to sacrifice their bodily autonomy, but this would also extend to other situations as well. Currently, you can sue people for all sorts of things and demand that they give you financial compensation for the different ailments they have inflicted on you. Under the assumption that we can override people's bodily autonomy when they have created a dependent, we would now be able to sue people for the use of their organs, blood, or bone marrow. To reiterate, if we say that people can override bodily rights when a person is responsible for causing another person to need them, this would apply to people being held legally responsible as well, which would mean that we could sue people for their bodies. Suppose I run a small coffee shop and I fail to put up a slippery when wet sign, and a customer trips, falls, and gets impaled on a straw, and it goes right through his kidney. He can survive now, but he will eventually need a transplant. But there is a very long waiting list for the next kidney, and there is no chance that he'll be able to get one in time. Does he now get to sue me for the use of my kidney? Now, I'll be the first to admit that this is a really outlandish example, but the point is that it is extremely morally problematic to force employers to sacrifice their bodies against their will for their customers or employees. This just seems like a terrible consequence of this line of reasoning. So I think that this pro-life objection to the unconscious violinist thought experiment fails, because it can't explain why people are required to provide for their dependents without having to donate bone marrow every now and again. If you accept the concept of bodily autonomy, however, this view can be explained. So if you like this video, please subscribe and comment. Commenting is good. I look forward to hearing from you.